Ukrainian and U.S. delegations met for talks in Saudi Arabia on Sunday. It's part of a diplomatic push by President Donald Trump to bring an end to Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. Ukraine's defense minister said they discussed proposals to protect energy facilities and critical infrastructure. And in a Sunday evening address, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said the day's talks were productive.
Our team is working in a completely constructive manner. The conversation is quite useful. The work of the delegations is continuing.
After speaking with the Ukrainians Sunday night, the U.S. delegation plans to sit down with the Russians on Monday. In an interview with Fox News Sunday, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff was optimistic about that meeting, as well as working with Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the war.
I feel that he wants peace. I just don't see that he wants to take all of Europe. This is a much different situation than it was in World War II. In World War II, there was no NATO. So you have countries that are armed there. To me, it just does. I take him at his word in this sense.
The White House says the aim of the current talks is to secure a ceasefire on the Black Sea, allowing the free flow of shipping. Bloomberg News, citing people familiar with the planning, reported on Sunday that the U.S. hopes to reach a broad ceasefire by April 20th. Trump said over the weekend that efforts to stop further escalation in the Ukraine-Russia war were, quote, somewhat under control. Yet despite all the diplomatic activity, Russia and Ukraine have both reported continued strikes. Ukrainian officials said on Sunday that a large-scale Russian drone attack on Kyiv the night before killed at least 3 people, including a 5-year-old child. Meanwhile, Russian authorities said they had shot down dozens of Ukrainian drones targeting the country's southwest, adding that the strikes had killed 1 person in Rostov. Russian forces have also continued to advance slowly in eastern Ukraine, a region Moscow claims to have annexed.
New Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on Sunday called a snap election for April 28th, saying he needed a strong mandate to deal with the threat posed by U.S. President Donald Trump.
We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty.
The comments are a sign of how relations between the two longtime allies and major trading partners have deteriorated. Trump has imposed tariffs on Canadian goods and threatened to annex it as its 51st state.
He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen. We're over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
The White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Carney's remarks. Carney, who was sworn in on March 14th, captured the Liberal leadership by persuading party members he was the best person to tackle Trump. The next election was not due until October, but Carney is hoping to capitalize on his party's remarkable recovery in the polls since January. It follows former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's resignation as well as Trump's threats. Earlier this month, Trump delayed a broad 25% tariff on some Canadian goods for 30 days. He has since imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports and threatened reciprocal tariffs on additional goods, including Canadian dairy and lumber, starting April 2nd. Canadians are rallying for their country and seeing a resurgence in nationalism.
And when we are attacked, we stand together.
On Saturday, residents gathered in Toronto to denounce U.S. tariffs. Canada-U.S. relations top the list of issues preoccupying residents, according to recent polls. Carney, a former 2-time central banker with no previous political or election campaign experience, now has 5 weeks to win over Canadians. On Sunday, Carney proposed cutting the lowest income tax bracket by 1 percentage point. Polls suggest the Liberals, who have been in power since 2015, have slightly pulled ahead of the official opposition Conservatives, who had led earlier in the year. The Conservatives have sought to portray Carney as an elitist, who plans to continue the Trudeau-era policy of high government spending.
Protesters took to the streets for a 5th night in Istanbul on Sunday after a Turkish court jailed Istanbul mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, pending trial on corruption charges. The court's decision to send İmamoğlu to jail came after the main opposition party, European leaders, and thousands of protesters criticized the actions against him as politicized and undemocratic. Imamoglu, President Tayyip Erdogan's main political rival, has denied the charges he faces as unimaginable accusations and slander. The government denies that investigations are politically motivated and says courts are independent. The mayor's troubles appear to be galvanizing opposition against Erdogan's government, which has run Turkey for 22 years. Police used pepper spray, tear gas, and water cannons to disperse crowds in what has become the country's biggest protest in more than a decade. Protesters wore masks and used umbrellas and cardboard to shield themselves from police. The same day, nearly 15 million Republican People's Party members and non-members streamed into polling stations nationwide to either elect or endorse Imamoglu as its candidate in a future presidential vote, the party said. The court said Imamoglu and at least 20 others were jailed as part of a corruption investigation. One of two opened against the two-term mayor last week.
Pope Francis returned to the Vatican on Sunday after surviving a 5-week battle in hospital against double pneumonia. It was the most serious health crisis of his 12-year papacy. Shortly before leaving Rome's Gemelli Hospital, he made his first public appearance from a balcony at the facility, while emotional well-wishers cheered from below. A car carrying the pontiff was accompanied by police vehicles through Rome. It made a short detour for him to bring flowers to the Basilica of St. Mary Major, a church to which Francis has a special devotion and visits frequently. Joshua McElwee is Reuters' Vatican correspondent.
The Vatican said he went into the Basilica briefly to pray. He was then brought back toward the Vatican. He has now gone back to the Vatican, to the Casa Santa Marta where he lives. His doctors have said he will require a further 2 months of rest to recuperate and to recover. As he's 88 years old, he has other health conditions, and it will take time for his body to fully heal.
During Pope Francis' appearance, he thanked Carmela Vittoria Mancuso, who arrived every morning during his hospitalization with yellow flowers. Mancuso, who had prayed for him nightly, expressed her relief.
Happy, joyful, I don't know. My heart was bursting. I didn't think I would feel this way.
Under medical orders of rest, it's unclear how much activity Francis will undertake in the coming months.
Smoke rises over southern Lebanon after an exchange of fire endangered a shaky truce. Israeli artillery and airstrikes hit South Lebanon on Saturday, after Israel said it had intercepted rockets fired from across the border. Lebanon's state news agency reported a spate of Israeli airstrikes and artillery barrages in the country's war-battered south, and several deaths. Lebanon's Hezbollah denied responsibility and said it had no link to the rocket launches. It said it remained committed to the US-brokered November ceasefire with Israel, which ended a year of conflict between the two sides. No group has claimed responsibility for the rockets. Here in Metula, people rushed to shelters after sirens sounded, but soon returned to their daily routines. Saturday's strikes were the first since Israel effectively abandoned a separate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, with Palestinian militant group Hamas, an ally of Hezbollah. Both groups are backed by Israel's arch-foe, Iran. Last year's war between Israel and Hezbollah was a spillover of the Gaza conflict. It rumbled across the border for months, before escalating into a blistering Israeli offensive that wiped out Hezbollah's top commanders, many of its fighters, and much of its arsenal. The Israeli military said early Saturday it had intercepted 3 rockets launched from a Lebanese district about 4 miles north of the border, which was the second cross-border launch since the truce. Israel said it was looking into who was responsible. The United Nations peacekeeping force in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL, said in a written statement on Saturday that it was alarmed by the border violence, and that a further escalation could have serious consequences for the region.
One of France's best-known actors, Gerard Depardieu, faces trial on Monday over alleged sexual assaults of 2 women on a film set. The case places the movie star at the heart of France's broader reckoning over sexual violence. The 76-year-old has faced a growing number of sexual assault allegations in recent years and has consistently denied any wrongdoing. This would be the first case for which he would be standing trial. Women's rights group representative Sophie Barr said while the Me Too movement contributed largely to opening up the path for the trial, resistance remains.
Donc, bien sûr qu'on est dans un contexte post-MeToo.
Of course, we're in a post-Me Too context in which it is possible for women to speak out and be believed by a lot of people. That said, like in all areas of social progress, there are also steps backwards, what we call the return of the ship. Meaning a part of society stays in resistance and seeks to protect the domination, to protect the patriarchal order, the order of sexual violence.
Du patriarcat, l'ordre de la violence sexuelle.
Depardieu's trial could be the highest profile Me Too case to come before the courts in France. The protest movement over sexual violence has struggled to gain the same traction in France as it has in the United States. Recently, however, there has been signs this might change. Giselle Pellicot became a global feminist icon after she waived her rights to anonymity during the trial of her former husband, who was convicted of drugging her and inviting dozens of men over to their home to sexually abuse her. Last month, a French court found film director Christophe Rougier guilty of sexually abusing actor Adèle Haenel when she was underage. Last week, a parliamentary inquiry commission questioned several prominent actors, directors and producers on the topic of sexual violence in cinema. Most of the men requested the hearings be held behind closed doors. American George Foreman, a sporting comeback king, died on Friday at age 76. He reclaimed the heavyweight boxing title at age 45, the oldest to do so, and went on to promote a famous grill. His family announced on Instagram that Foreman died peacefully, surrounded by loved ones. Foreman's fight against Muhammad Ali in Kinshasa, Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, went down as one of the most celebrated boxing matches in history. The rumble in the jungle saw Ali defeat the much larger Foreman, knocking him out in the 8th round. The loss devastated Foreman and would see him retire 3 years later in 1977 to become an ordained minister. After a rough childhood growing up in Texas, Foreman used his size and fists and turned to boxing. At age 19, and in his 25th amateur fight, Foreman captured the heavyweight boxing gold medal at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. Turning pro, he won 37 straight matches on his way to face reigning champion Joe Frazier in Jamaica, winning by technical knockout in round 2. In 1987, a decade after his first retirement, and at a considerably heavier 315 pounds, Foreman staged an unlikely return to the ring. He went on to win 24 straight matches and would eventually become the oldest ever heavyweight champion, aged 45. Foreman's last match was in 1997, ending his career with a professional record of 76 wins and 5 losses. Throughout the 1990s and after retirement, he was an enthusiastic pitchman for various products, most notably an electric grill. The company would pay Foreman and his partners $137.5 million to put his name on the grill and other goods.
The Sudanese army said it seized full control of the presidential palace in capital Khartoum on Friday. It's one of the most significant gains in a 2-year conflict with the paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, which has threatened to divide the country. This footage, released on social media, showed army personnel inside the palace chanting while hoisting weapons. It had previously been seized by the RSF when the war broke out in April 2023. The date couldn't be verified by Reuters, but soldiers in the footage say Friday's date, matching media reports. The army had long been on the back foot, but has recently been making advances, managing to retake territory in the centre of the country. Meanwhile, the RSF has hardened its control in the west, moving the country towards de facto partition. The group is working to set up a parallel government in areas it controls. However, it's not expected to receive widespread international recognition. The army said it had also taken control of ministries and other key buildings in central Khartoum. Military sources said RSF fighters had withdrawn about 400 metres away. The RSF did not immediately comment on the army's advances. This conflict has led to what the UN calls the world's largest humanitarian crisis. It spread famine and disease across the country of 50 million people. Both sides have been accused of war crimes, while the RSF has also been charged with genocide. They both deny the charges.
Indonesian authorities have raised the alert status to the highest level after the eruption of the Lewotobi Laki-laki volcano Thursday night. Ash clouds spewed more than 5 miles high, and an Australian airline cancelled some flights into Bali on Friday. The eruption of the volcano in East Nusa Tenggara province followed dozens of smaller ones since March 13th, the National Geological Agency said. The agency warned of lava floods and said there were smaller eruptions early on Friday. A disaster mitigation agency spokesperson told Reuters that at least one person was injured during evacuations. There was no immediate details on the size or logistics of the evacuations. This man said his relative mistook the hot ashes for rain and was burnt after falling on a piece of burning wood. Jetstar Qantas Airways' low-cost subsidiary cancelled flights between Australia and Bali on Friday morning because of the volcanic ash. In November last year, the Lewotobi Laki-laki volcano erupted, pelting nearby villages with hot rocks and lava flows. At least 9 people were killed and thousands were evacuated. Indonesian authorities had said at the time that it aimed to permanently relocate the residents. It was not immediately clear how many people were affected by Thursday's eruption. Indonesia has close to 130 active volcanoes and sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, an area of high seismic activity atop various tectonic plates.
When Ukrainian Maria Pankova exchanged messages with her friend Pavlo Humeniuk back in December, she had no idea the combat engineer was fighting in Russia's Kursk region. 7 days later, she would learn he had gone missing.
Well, we got a message from, it wasn't a commander, it's like one of the guys from the brigade, and he basically just sends this message like, it is the 6th of December, Nova Ivanivka, they hit him by artillery, we cannot take his body, and like...
4 months on, she still follows social media in hopes of finding Humeniuk's body. But that hope is dwindling as Russia has retaken the area where he was said to be killed. When Ukraine launched its incursion into the Kursk region last August, it took the world and Russia by surprise. It was the biggest attack on sovereign Russian territories since the Nazi invasion of 1941. Kyiv's troops seized more than 500 square miles, but outmanned the area they were able to control quickly became a narrow wedge.
It's more like complicated to believe that it was like worth it. And especially now we just like lost a lot in the last just like couple of weeks. Just a lot.
Ukraine's retreat from the Kursk city of Sudzha, recently confirmed by Kyiv, has deepened the public divide on the incursion's benefits. In a rehabilitation centre in Kyiv, soldier Oleksiy Deshevy, who lost his hand as he fought for Kursk, says he saw no logic in the operation.
I think we shouldn't have started this operation at all. The units that we've lost in Kursk region could have chased the Russians from the Pokrovsk front all the way to the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk. But if we started, we had to keep going and not lose many units that could have fought them anywhere else along the front. There's no sense in just withdrawing them from Kursk now, or in any of this operation. I don't get it.
Ukraine used some of its top brigades, but the grouping was never large enough to be able to hold on to a larger area, as Ukrainian lawmaker Serhiy Rachmanin explains.
From the very beginning, logistics was seriously complicated, because as we entered the Kursk region, we ensured sufficient depth, but we did not ensure sufficient width.
However, he believes, and the Ukrainian Armed Forces General Staff said, the operation achieved most of its goals, meant to put pressure on Moscow and boost morale. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also said it diverted Russian soldiers and disrupted attempts to create its own buffer zones in Ukraine's northeastern regions. There are no official data available on how many soldiers Ukraine lost in the Kursk region, as details on wartime losses are classified. In December 2024, Zelensky said 43,000 soldiers were killed and 370,000 soldiers wounded since Russia's invasion in February 2022. Russia's retaking of the Kursk region removes a potential bargaining chip for Ukraine as US President Donald Trump undertakes talks to end the war with Russia, which holds around a fifth of Ukraine's national lands.
This is Point Judith, a small seaside village in Rhode Island. It's one of the communities where President Donald Trump's regulatory freeze is being felt hard.
Point Judith completely relies on the squid fishery. You might be able to participate in other fisheries part of the year, but none of them are enough to keep you going all year.
Commercial fisherman John Ainsworth has been fishing off of Rhode Island since 1990.
When do the seasons open? When do they decide how much quota is caught? Will it be a free-for-all? I don't know.
America's $320 billion fishing industry relies on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, to manage coastal fisheries. It sets quotas and determines the start and close of fishing seasons. Trump's January 20th declaration of a 60-day freeze on regulations has disrupted this process.
I look at NOAA-based data.
This is Christopher Willey, a charter fishing guide and restaurant owner.
On an annual basis, the work that they do regulates our industry in that what we can and cannot fish for, what times a year, how many we can take, how many, the quota, how many pounds per state or how many pounds per fishery. That's all important data that they supply, which is necessary to actually have a sustainable fishery.
The freeze has allowed overfishing of Atlantic bluefin tuna this month in waters off North Carolina, while delaying the start to the fishing season for some East Coast fleets. The overfishing down south has meant there may not be enough fish to catch when they migrate north later in the season. That's according to industry groups and federal government employees. The White House did not respond to requests for comment.
It shouldn't be partisan when it's about sustainability, because the sustainability equals economic success.
NOAA also lost 5% of its workforce dealing with fisheries last month, according to a senior employee. The agency confirmed the freeze in an email, but said that it would not respond to Reuters' request for comment on management and personnel issues.
For me, it means that the fishery stakeholders across the U.S. have lost a voice.
Sarah Schumann is a commercial vessel crew member in Rhode Island.
We've lost the ability to ensure that governance is responsive to what's actually happening out in the ecosystem, what's happening in the market, and what's happening, in our industry.
The Trump administration has told all federal agencies to submit plans for further staff cuts.
Flights to Britain's Heathrow Airport began resuming late on Friday after a fire at a nearby electrical substation knocked out its power, shutting Europe's busiest airport. The closure caused travel turmoil worldwide. Heathrow said its teams had worked tirelessly to reopen and that there would be a limited number of flights on Friday, mostly focused on relocating aircraft and bringing planes into London. CEO Thomas Wolby called the incident unprecedented.
Contingencies of certain sizes, we cannot guard ourselves against 100%. I hope people appreciate that we do not close down the airport unless we have severe safety concerns. That's why we do it, and that's what has happened today.
Police said that after an initial assessment, they were not treating the incident as suspicious, although inquiries remained ongoing. The airport had been due to handle more than 1,300 flights, flying up to 291,000 passengers. Planes were instead diverted to other airports in Britain and across Europe, while many long-haul flights returned to their point of departure. Among those waiting to return to London was Jane Davis, a teacher supervising students on a school trip to Dubai.
It's bad enough if you're with your family, but when you're responsible for 8 children and who are ready, who've had an amazing week, but are just ready to be home, you've got a heavy day in front of you.
Airline executives, electrical engineers, and passengers questioned how Britain's gateway to the world could be forced to close by one fire, however large. Heathrow said it had diesel generators and uninterruptible power supplies in place to land aircraft and evacuate passengers safely. and that those systems all operated as expected. Britain's Transport Minister Heidi Alexander said those backups, however, were not designed to power the entire airport.
It's important to remember that large airports such as Heathrow take up about as much energy as a small city, and so I've spoken to the chief executive of Heathrow about what has happened and any lessons that might be learned for the future.
The airline industry is now facing the prospect of a financial hit costing tens of millions of dollars, and a likely fight over who should pay. Airline experts said the last time European airports experienced disruption on such a large scale was back in 2010, when an Icelandic volcanic ash cloud grounded some 100,000 flights. Pope Francis, who has been battling pneumonia for more than 5 weeks, will be discharged from hospital on Sunday. That's according to his medical team, who on Saturday said the 88-year-old will require a further 2 months of rest at the Vatican. Francis was admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital on February 14th with a severe respiratory infection, which has been the most serious health crisis of his 12-year papacy. Dr. Sergio Alfieri is the head of the Pope's medical team.
The Holy Father was never intubated, and he always remained alert and oriented. The Holy Father will be discharged tomorrow, as we said before, in a stable clinical condition with a prescription to partially continue drug therapy and a convalescence and rest period at least 2 months.
He added that the pontiff no longer has pneumonia, but is also not completely healed from a complex infection. On Friday, one senior cardinal had said the Pope would need to, quote, relearn to speak after battling a respiratory infection for so long. The Vatican said Francis would make his first public appearance in more than a month on Sunday to offer a blessing from the window of his hospital room before being discharged. The Pope had been set to meet with Britain's King Charles, as well as lead the Vatican's annual celebrations for Easter in the coming weeks. A spokesperson said on Saturday that the Vatican would decide about those appointments at a later date.
Video obtained by Reuters showed the moment an Israeli airstrike hit Gaza City on Sunday, as officials said dozens were killed by strikes across the enclave, including a Hamas political leader. According to Gaza's health ministry, the death toll since the beginning of the war has now surpassed 50,000 Palestinians. In southern Gaza's Khan Yunis, a funeral was held for Hamas official Salah al-Badawiel and his wife. They were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the city, according to officials of the militant group. Badawiel was a member of Hamas's decision-making political office and had taken up roles such as leading the group's delegation for indirect truce talks with Israel in 2009. A large crater was left in the ground after the airstrike that Hamas officials said had killed him. The Israeli military confirmed in a statement on Sunday that it had killed Badawiel. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the main aim of the war is to destroy Hamas as a military and governing entity, and that the aim of its new military campaign in Gaza, which began on Tuesday, is to force the group to give up all remaining hostages. Hamas has accused Israel of breaking the terms of the January ceasefire agreement by refusing to start second-phase talks for a permanent end to the war. The group has said it is still willing to negotiate and was studying bridging proposals from the United States. On Sunday, Gaza's residents reported an escalation in Israel's military action. Families mourned the loss of their loved ones and pleaded for an end to the war. Rights groups are also warning of a renewed risk of famine in the enclave after Israel began blocking the entry of goods into Gaza again since March the 2nd. We got up in a panic and found ourselves covered in rubble, filth and dust, this woman said. The young men came and pulled out children from under the rubble. Little children, what was their fault? She added. While this man said he just wants to live with his family in peace. Brothers and sisters, the whole world, listen to us. We don't want wars, he said. We want to live like the rest of the world. Video obtained by Reuters showed the moment an Israeli airstrike hit Gaza City on Sunday, as officials said dozens were killed by strikes across the enclave, including a Hamas political leader. According to Gaza's health ministry, the death toll since the beginning of the war has now surpassed 50,000 Palestinians. In southern Gaza's Khan Yunis, a funeral was held for Hamas official Salah al-Badawiel and his wife. They were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the city, according to officials of the militant group. Badawiel was a member of Hamas's decision-making political office and had taken up roles such as leading the group's delegation for indirect truce talks with Israel in 2009. A large crater was left in the ground after the airstrike that Hamas officials said had killed him. The Israeli military confirmed in a statement on Sunday that it had killed Badawiel. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the main aim of the war is to destroy Hamas as a military and governing entity, and that the aim of its new military campaign in Gaza, which began on Tuesday, is to force the group to give up all remaining hostages. Hamas has accused Israel of breaking the terms of the January ceasefire agreement by refusing to start second-phase talks for a permanent end to the war. The group has said it is still willing to negotiate and was studying bridging proposals from the United States. On Sunday, Gaza's residents reported an escalation in Israel's military action. Families mourned the loss of their loved ones and pleaded for an end to the war. Rights groups are also warning of a renewed risk of famine in the enclave after Israel began blocking the entry of goods into Gaza again since March the 2nd. We got up in a panic and found ourselves covered in rubble, filth and dust, this woman said. The young men came and pulled out children from under the rubble. Little children, what was their fault? She added. While this man said he just wants to live with his family in peace. Brothers and sisters, the whole world, listen to us. We don't want wars, he said. We want to live like the rest of the world.